hello to everyone out there in podcast land, and welcome to another episode of Your Neck of the Woods, where we talk about everything going on in Ward 1 and all over this beautiful city of Calgary. As always, I'm Jacob McGregor, candidate for Ward 1, and I'm here with my co-host Jason Diodati. And Jays are wild on the show today because our guest today is Ward 13 candidate Jay Unsworth. Do you want to introduce yourself, Jay?
Yeah, thanks, Jacob. I'm Jay Unsworth. I'm running for City Council in Ward 13. I'm really excited to be here, and I think really from the main reason is that I am a very, very, very proud Bownesian. I was born on 34th Ave in the lovely Ward 1. I hold it very, very, very close to my heart. So, just happy to have some conversation with other candidates, and I love the collaborative approach that you've been proposing, Jacob, especially in this divisive world that we seem to be living in. So,
absolutely, we're definitely going to touch on that. But I guess to start, since you mentioned it, what made you betray your roots and move to Ward 13?
It's a really great question. I've actually lobbied my wife for years to come back home to Bowness, but she works actually at a school near really kind of south of the city, and so it was that decision. It's like, who's going to spend the time driving? And I work actually at Mount Royal University, so it was when we looked at the distance, it was easier for me to drive to Mount Royal from where we live now in Ward 13, as opposed to her driving from Ward 1. And I mean, it really doesn't matter in this city where you live.
Absolutely not.
It's awesome. I love it. Like I said, I was born at the Foothills Hospital. 50 years ago, and my parents were on 34th Ave, and so yeah, that's my.
And hey, happy wife, happy life, as they say, right? But
100%. And I've got a 6-year-old daughter, so we need to keep her happy as well.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
So, Jason, do you want to say anything before we get into the meat of things here?
Thank you for having me. And Jay, that's awesome, right? Like you said, I mean, happy wife, happy life. And if it was easier for the family and again for your daughter to kind of get, move away from that Ward 1, then I'm glad you did it, and we're glad to have you on. And I guess my first kind of thoughts, and I don't want to overstep here, Jacob, but kind of one of my first thoughts is I was reading your platform here earlier today, and I see that the number one kind of thing that you believe in is transparency. And Jacob, I thought we'd start off maybe in that transparency. It's kind of the multiple conversations that we've had regarding transparency in this current council. I don't mean to jump the gun. Is that okay?
Oh, absolutely. That was going to be the first thing I was going to ask about as well, especially with how many times we've touched on the prevalence of in-camera closed-door meetings and other things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so if you wouldn't mind, Jake, I'd love to ask you, Mr. Unsworth or Jay, do you see kind of what we're seeing in that, these closed session meetings, while they may have their place in certain application or in certain topics? So when we're talking, private information of citizens, or whether it be a closed door negotiation that's best to be done, outside the public sphere and eye, do you see kind of what we're seeing with kind of the dissent that seems to be sowed and the distrust that's being sowed within Calgarians across the map?
I think it's a great question, and I think that my response to something like that would be, there's always going to be a need for in-camera, especially from a governance perspective. I think it's critical. You have to have these meetings, because if you're looking for investment, if you're looking for, that kind of the private public sector partnerships, there's a lot of conversation that needs to take place that you can't reveal certain proprietary things, certain
Absolutely.
Private information. And I think that's to be respected. I think what happens is that it's a deeper rooted issue, is that I think there's an erosion of trust. And with erosion of trust becomes, we multiply that and magnify that with closed door meetings. And so when these things happen and we're not trusting what's taking place, then all of a sudden we're starting to make more of it as a citizenry that maybe there should be. And without our council having that kind of built that trust within the citizenship, I mean, that becomes problematic. So whether it's too much, and we read in media snippets, and so the media picks up on these kinds of things. What's in camera? We've got some divisive councillors on council that talk about these kinds of things, and I'm not sure that they understand the governance structure is probably as best they should. There's a big difference between governance and operations, and I think sometimes our governors decide that they're going to meddle in the operations aspect of things, and we need to be careful about that.
Fair enough. That's an excellent point, but I'm glad you mentioned this erosion of trust, because I'm hearing that a lot from my neighbors and potential constituents. I'd like to hear some of your thoughts on maybe how we build that up. I personally think it has to do with open and honest communication. That's a big part of why both of us are running, it seems.
Jacob, you hit the nail on the head. I'll give you a prime example. Is when we look at you talk about the communication piece. I think communication is absolutely everything. And we're not seeing that from some of our elected representatives. And I think that spills across the board into all wards. And a prime example is probably that community or that guidebook for great communities. And I think there's been a lot of really great work that went into that. It's been 10 years from the visionary perspective, 5 years really in the making. Yeah. The biggest problem with that is that we didn't find out about it until probably February. And so now people start reacting with emotion. Oh, they're going to change my neighborhood. They're going to start changing the makeup of my communities. I've invested my money here. I want my community. That's why I live here. I completely understand that. Had there been communication, there's a difference between, and I find this within the city, and I've got some experience with this as well. There's a difference between communication and consultation. And sometimes I worry that the city says consultation when they really mean communication. Communication first and foremost is telling people what you're going to do, this is how you're going to do it. Basically, the decision's been made. Consultation is getting people there from the beginning, saying, hey, how does this impact you? What is your feedback? Let's help shape these things. And my experience is that sometimes with the city, they confuse the two terms. And
that is an absolutely excellent way of putting that. And we've talked about the guidebook now, the guide for local area planning, pretty extensively lately on the show when it became a hot button sort of issue around City Hall. And when you look at these what we heard sessions that were done after the public hearings, it sounds like from a lot of people's perspective, it was less of a consultation and more of a, this is what's happening, here's a bunch of information.
A prescription.
That's
almost
not really the way to do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the sample size of who they're discussing these kinds of things with, and it's not representative of the entire city, and so that becomes problematic. I mean, I sat through the presentation that the city gave to everybody once I finally found out about this, and I just asked about their methodology, who they discussed, what were some of the comments that were made, what were some of the outcomes of the consultation process, and I hate to say it, but I got the city speak. Oh, I mean, we talked with these people and it's all available on our website and you can go find it. Yeah, I mean, that kind of talk needs to stop. It absolutely needs to, it's on our website, you can go find it. That's not okay. Respect our citizens' times and say, no, this is what we found, this is how the process was designed. And you mean, Jacob, when you talk about that distrust piece, and when we can't find voter records, and I'm sure you probably spent as much time as I did trying to find records of your, you mean, councillors, and
absolutely,
if it wasn't until actually, and I think it was the Ward 9 office that finally came up with a program to show what these voting records were like. It was near impossible, and I did a lot of research and see the flip-flopping, and that's where the trust starts getting eroded.
Right, and I've looked into this on a couple of issues because the councillor up here in my ward tends to sometimes vote one way in committee and then say and do different things when we get to a combined meeting of council, and then conveniently deletes any tweets he made about his previous actions, so that you have to sort of dig into the labyrinthian monstrosity that can be Calgary.ca. And we've talked about that before. You have to go down a rabbit hole even just to do research on issues like the Green Line and the Event Center and the guidebook. You have to do these deep dives into the bowels of Calgary.ca to find the reports you're looking for.
Yeah, again, I agree 100%. And we talk about these trust issues, and we start looking at, it doesn't take a lot of research to find out, what are the top most distrusted professions? And you're up there with telemarketers and car salespeople and politicians. Yeah. And we need to change that narrative. We need to start speaking the truth. And we're not always going to be able to tell people what they want to hear, but we need to tell people what they need to hear. Whether they like it or not, but supply them with the information so they can come to their own conclusions.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but I heard the joke a lot when I told people I know that I was running that I was too honest to be a politician. And that sort of joke, just as much as they're joking, it just paints the picture entirely of the profession we're getting into here.
That's why, Jacob, you need to run for office, because we need to at some point change that narrative. Something has happened over the last little while, that it is an us versus them mentality, and it's these ideologies that start stepping into the realm. One of the things I love the most about the municipal arena, and when I say I'm not a politician, I'm not a politician. I'm not a card-carrying politician from any party, but we see what's happening on the provincial landscape. We see what's happening in the federal landscape. We see what's happening to the south of our border. And all of a sudden we start defining ourselves by I'm left or I'm right or this. But in the municipal arena, no, it's Calgary for Calgarians. What's the best thing for Calgary? How do we represent each other? And when ideology starts coming into play within the municipal arena, we're all in trouble. We need to start asking ourselves some better questions so we can get better answers.
And I've freely admitted on this program that some of my experience is volunteering with my local MP who happens to be conservative, but there's a reason we don't run with letters next to our name in municipal politics. I might have views that I believe in, but people that know me also know that I'm a very pragmatic person. So if something is the right thing to do for the majority of my constituents, that's where I'm gonna lean towards going.
Just because you volunteer for your MLA doesn't make you any more or less Calgarian. It makes you actually very much a Calgarian. And we need these opinions. We need people talking about things, because again, I'll always go back to it. It allows us to ask better questions. And if we can put that in the context of Calgary, we will always get better answers. But if we just start looking at purely from an ideological point of view, we're in trouble. And I worry about our kids' future. And like I mentioned earlier, I've got a 6-year-old little girl. I think a lot of your listeners probably have kids. We want our kids to stay in Calgary. We want them to make Calgary a purchasing decision and make it their home. And we want to create that environment. Remember when the 2013 floods came? Yeah. And this is another reason why I love Bowness, because I probably spent about 3 or 4 solid days in Bowness helping out with the floods down there. I remember the '88 Olympics. So our community comes together. It doesn't matter where you're from. It doesn't matter the walk of life, your gender, your orientation. It doesn't. We're all Calgarians. Yeah. And we need to get back to that. We need to get back there, but
absolutely. I love that you mentioned that there's so much volunteership in the city, because there really is. But you also mentioned you want your kids to make Calgary a purchasing decision, and we are, according to a lot of recent reports, losing a lot of youth after they graduate high school and university, they're leaving to go other places. So how in your mind do we make Calgary both a more attractive business climate? You have a background in business, so I'm fascinated to hear your answer, and also a more attractive place to live and raise a family.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate the question. Yeah, you're right. I have a background in business, but I've also got a background in environmental science, and really with a focus on social, environmental, and economical sustainability, which is really, really important to me. But how we approach this is, I worry that Calgary is at a stage where we're standing still. We're fighting back and forth. We keep going back to the well. And in a world that in rapid change, standing still is like walking backwards. There's the globe is changing at such a rapid rate. Technology is changing so fast. There's so many great things that are going on, and there's some amazing things happening right here in the city of Calgary. I mean, you look at NMAX. I mean, we're the largest shareholder of NMAX. They contribute back, 50 or $55 million to our bottom line in Calgary, and they're doing some amazing things with solar energy and those kinds of things. Our oil and gas, bedrock of our economy, will be for a long time.
Absolutely.
That's not going to change. But our oil and gas companies are incredibly smart. They're diversifying. They're getting into different verticals within their own businesses. They know that things are rapidly changing, and we need to start acknowledging that. And we need to do a better job, I think, partnering with our post-secondary institutions. And I think we've got some great ones. I work at one. I worked at the other one on the north side of the river, at University of Calgary, and we've got two universities in the province of Alberta that punch way above their weight in the global rankings. Some amazing people doing some amazing work, and we need to tap into that and saying, hey, what does the future look like? We need to work with our developers. Everyone gets on the developers, but at the end of the day, let's remember our developers are in business to develop, to make money.
Yeah,
And so
everybody's here making money.
Yeah, we need to include them at the table. I mean, they've got shareholders that they need to satisfy. That's their mandate as a business. That's why they get into business. They're entrepreneurs, but they're really smart. And as opposed to start thinking that people are out to get everybody and out to put knives in our backs, we need to think differently. We need a new way of thinking how we approach things, because we got such an amazing city. Our geographical location is unbelievable. Our access to resources, our access to transportation, absolutely brilliant. We're very, very lucky, and we will get in our own way if we don't take a step back and say, oh, wait a minute, how are we going to work together?
Not only are we seeing this, the first diversification from the energy and the natural resource companies, but we're also seeing a sort of boom in not only the tech industry coming here, but the tech infrastructure building up within the city. And I think that's going to be a really important way forward, because how business is going to work in the city post-COVID, and even pre-COVID, this was starting to be the case, but especially post-COVID, with more and more people working remotely and doing things like we're doing, is going to change how the office works. And that's going to mean having to have some mixed use ability even with these office towers, I think.
Yeah, you mean we know. You mean there's no you mean denying it. Our city is very overbuilt, and we built to meet our economy. And businesses have left because they can't make money. It's not their fault. I mean, that's, again, it's their obligation. If you can't make money, you are going to close your doors and you're going to go somewhere where you can. But we talk about the change. And we do. We need to think about, okay, and we're changing. But I think another question that we don't do a really good job of asking ourselves is, what's not going to change? What's going to stay the same? And we know that access to education, transit, our emergency services, the need for those aren't going to change. We will always need those. How do we invest in those? How do we make sure that the number one thing I think of our elected representatives is to ensure we're safe. And no more important, and Jacob, I think you probably agree with me in that. You mean that voter list thing that we saw with this guy running for mayor,
Yes.
who's basically ruined it for everybody. And you and I are in a very similar situation, is that we're going up against incumbents. They have this information. We don't.
I was
So
just gonna mention that, and I fully support Mr. Johnston not having this information. But
yeah,
one thing we do have to think about is that this is a pro-incumbent slash pseudo-incumbent. If you look at some people say in Ward 7 where Drew Farrell's retiring, but one of her staffers is running for the seat. These people that are either incumbents or pseudo-incumbents have this information already, and we're gonna build our list. That's the canvassing just got a million times more important, but this decision definitely does make things harder.
it does. And in a world where the incumbents, you mean the chance of them winning are well over 80%. I don't know what the actual stats are, but it puts you and I at a difficult in a difficult situation. But I think you mean, for me anyways, one of the reasons, again, another reason I'm running is to really have that conversation and to spark the conversation about what's happening in, and almost more importantly, to our city. When we start looking around what's happening to our city and how we're imploding, and this divisiveness, and again, this Mr. Johnston guy running for mayor, and it's, you mean, how he's allowed to do that, because I think that there should be a code of conduct. If you're going to be in city council, you have to abide by a code of conduct. I think if you're going to run for city council, you need to abide by a code of conduct. And just by signing up to say you're going to run, you should be held accountable to that code of conduct. And
You'd think that would be a thing, and there is some of that with, like, you can't be a felon, but oh my goodness, you can just, and we've seen it with this person. I am always hesitant to name KJJ because that gives him more of a platform than he already has, but he definitely skirted awfully close to that line where he wouldn't be eligible, but is still eligible. And that doesn't seem like it should be possible.
yeah, you mean, if we're going to look at, you mean, the Electoral Act, and you mean reform and those kinds of things, maybe we need to dig a little bit deeper on what that really means about who we're allowing. You mean, I'm a fierce and staunch supporter of democracy and want people to be able to run for office, but there's a limit when you start threatening your fellow citizens, and it's, to me, it's reprehensible in the fact that you mean, Alberta Health Services, these people are putting themselves in harm's way every single day, and no more than the last 14 or 16 months, and yet you mean, people are going to attack them? To me, it's just beyond comprehension.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it breaks my heart to see that. It really does. And
So Jason, I know I heard references from Jay there about emergency services and some urban sprawl. So do you have any questions maybe stemming from that, Jason?
I do, absolutely. And it's an interesting question. And sorry for not jumping in. I've just been fascinated hearing you guys go back and forth. So
absolutely. No worries, my friend.
Let's let you guys banter. But and so that was a question that we discussed with a couple other candidates in terms of the urban sprawl and kind of the desire right now for single detached because of the COVID situation that we're in, and trying to get away from that densification or that kind of, more urban living in close quarters, with urban sprawl as it is now going forward. Jay, if you had to put on your future hat, for lack of a better term, or your forecasting hat, do you see in the next, let's keep it kind of short, in the next 5 years, do you see urban sprawl still being something that we contend with, in the sense that the demand for that further out, not so kind of crammed in, or at least if that's a perception, style going forward? Or do you see that more urban vertical building, more densification, do you see there still being a demand for that post COVID? What are your thoughts that way?
You just asked a very, very big question.
Yeah, I'm so sorry.
No, it's great. No, this is how we get to better answers and better conversation, better dialogue. So I'm going to start by first off saying that we absolutely need densification. We have urban sprawl for a couple, I'm going to say for three main reasons. And I think, yes, there's a demand. People want this lifestyle. People want to have the nice white house with a picket fence and the dog name spot in their front yard, their backyard, and those kinds of things. Whether that is 100% true for all citizens, I would challenge it's probably not. But that's the world we live in. We've got water rights. And Calgary is blessed with these really great water rights to allow them to expand. We're very different than a lot of other municipalities in Canada and North America. But my third point being is that I think we're living we've got a Ponzi scheme going on here in a bit of a sense. And let me explain what I mean by that is that when we expand, when we have this sprawl, what happens is that the developers will develop, they come in, they pay for the roads, they pay for the infrastructure, they get the houses, they sell the houses, they make a profit. But what happens is that they turn the properties over to the homeowners once they buy them. So the city starts generating tax revenue for very, very little money up front, very little money up front, but they start generating more money. And what happens once that the roads now, they turn the roads, they turn the infrastructure over, they turn the pipes and the lights and all those kinds of things over the city. Well, once it becomes the end of their lifespan, it needs to get paid for. And we are not putting money aside fast enough to be able to pay for that kind of thing. And it's post-World War II construction. That's what's happening, and especially in Calgary with all this land. So this is the problem. And this is a long-term problem that is going to come to roost. And it's going to come to roost, maybe not within the next 10 or 15 years, but a little bit longer, maybe 20, 25 years down the road. Once all these developed communities, now they start needing the maintenance, where's that money coming from? It's coming. And we need to start thinking, we need to plan long-term and act short-term. But the developers are, again, I'll go back to it, they need to make their money now. So they make their money now. It's attractive. The city's like, hey, we can generate this much more tax revenue without having to raise taxes. So everything makes sense until it doesn't, until the numbers don't add up, and it's coming.
Well, and there's an interesting parallel happening now, and it seems unrelated, and I apologize that it does, but it struck in my mind. And it's the parallel we're seeing with, I think, not to really go out of the conversation here, but almost kind of like the Tampa Bay Lightning and certain teams in the NHL, where they will put some of their big cap spenders on injury reserve until the day before playoffs, so that when they're looking at adding more additions, the cap space isn't in contention. But now the chickens are coming home to roost, right? Other teams are aware, and the league has to now fumble, and these teams are now having to fumble because it was all about top loading the money now, push the problem, kick the can down the road. And I feel like that's what you've identified.
I'll tell you guys now, I'm loving the cap circumvention in hockey and the history talk, because I'm a huge hockey fan as well as an advanced placement history nerd in my scholastic days. So, and Jay made an excellent point regarding it's inexpensive until it isn't, because in addition to the costs down the line, you also make utilities more expensive. You stretch our emergency services that we were talking about thinner and thinner. They're already spread thin as it is, so we're starting to see little symptoms of the problem, and it's just going to get worse as we go.
100%. The sports analogy is perfect, right? You look at you start getting these emerging players in their entry level contracts for the first 3 years. You're getting them at bargain level prices. It's fantastic. But once you start winning a couple cups, and that's why, you look at, and I don't want to go on a tangent, but you look at teams like the Pittsburgh Penguins, how amazing that they've been able to manage their salary business and still be competitive for as long as they have. it says a lot to their management piece, right? And so if a city can start looking at it from that perspective too and saying, okay, we know these costs are coming in 5, 10, 15 years down the road. How are we going to react now? And if you can start thinking about it from that perspective, it starts making a lot more sense.
What's funny is a lot of us, we are all Canadian here. So a lot of us are very familiar with these concepts, and yet nobody seems to be able to apply them to government, which seems a little bizarre, because we'd all be armchair general managers yelling about cat management if it was a hockey team, but we don't think about it with the city.
100%. You know, it's amazing you say that, Jacob. And I remember when Canada won the 2002 gold medal, and I remember going downtown. It didn't matter who you're from. We were all Canadian. We were all on the same team. We're all cheering for the same thing. If we could just get that kind of thinking back and saying, hey, how do we make this happen? We know long term there's going to be challenges. We know there's going to be pain, but we shoot ourselves in the foot, and we shot ourselves in the foot. I mean, remember when we got the Ralph bucks, when all of a sudden Ralph Klein gave everyone $400? You know, like, you mean the bars and restaurants did really well. You mean when Ed Stelmach canceled the healthcare payment for everybody, when there's people out there that can afford to pay the healthcare premium. You mean we look at our medical system and these short-term myopic legacy pieces that absolutely did us no favors. I'm a huge proponent of, I really believe in, we make $2 and we spend $1. But the point of that is that we also save $1. So when times are tough, when things aren't going as well, we've got this little rainy day fund that we can say, hey, we can weather the storm, we can get over the hump, we can get through this. But we just, for some reason, we get in our own way.
Yeah. And it's interesting. The parallel there for me as well is the idea that if you are in public office, I can understand, right? If you've dedicated your life's work, there's an element of you that wants to create some sort of legacy, or you want to be remembered for the work that you did. However, to pull certain frivolous, acts or to do something so, like you said, myopic, purely for that purpose is against the best interest of the city, and so, or of government. And so on that note, and on your note of future planning, I have a little bit of a different question. And Jacob, we haven't really discussed this previously, but it's something that I've thought about more and more. And it seems to be the narrative that's coming out. And especially, I work in the retail trade. I see a lot of those part-time employees come through and leave, and I analyze that kind of changeover or what's the word I'm looking for?
Turnover,
that lack of turnover. That's what I'm looking for. That level of turnover. And so my question becomes now, and if we're taking our sample from today or the last year and a half, and we were to apply it to years down the road, there is something to be said about the future of something like universal basic income, which seems like is coming faster and faster. Now, this is a subject that, from other people that I've spoken to, they've kind of looked into it. Other candidates have kind of seen and kind of been, interested in seeing where that's going to go. But again, it's kind of hard to look at on a municipal level, because chances are if UBI becomes a permanent thing beyond COVID, it'll probably have implications on a federal and a provincial level. But do you see, is there an opportunity for the city of Calgary to forecast that? And if you were on council, do you see that? And Jacob, I'll ask you the same question. Do you see this conversation becoming more pertinent, and a way that, like in the sense that the city may have to pivot in their strategy with the idea that there will be those potentially taken out of the workforce, but are given, stimulating cash to hopefully, with the idea of UBI working, spend within the economy? Do you see that being something within, the realm of your term, should you be elected? Same with you, Jacob. Do you see that as something that is a conversation that will need to happen to accommodate that change?
I don't see it coming soon. I don't see it within one term. 2 is even a stretch, and I hesitate to look further beyond that. I will be honest, I have never really been a fan of universal basic income, even as somebody who I'm a person with a disability. I have age, so I do get my check every month from Alberta government. of course, this also comes with a moderate level of health insurance and such, but I think UBI has the potential to end up being something like, and this isn't to disparage the entire mass of people, because not everybody would use it this way, but Jay mentioned Ralph Bucks and
Yeah.
how the bars did really well. And that
Yeah.
would be a concern for me with this sort of blanket income program. Now, from a city perspective, if something like that were to come from another order of government, you obviously do have to look at how that's going to affect things, because it's going to affect the occupancy of your office space, how people travel in the city, how people are spending money and generating the economy. So it would absolutely be something we would have to plan for if it did come to pass.
Yeah, I'm gonna just step in real quick with the UBI, and I you look at Andrew Yang of the States, and he's a huge proponent of it, and I highly admire Andrew Yang. I think he's groundbreaking the way he thinks. He's an economist, really smart guy. I think the one thing that economists don't bring into the mix sometimes is that the human nature aspect. And I worry that we would screw it up. I would worry we'd screw it up royally. We would be rewarding maybe the wrong people, not rewarding the right people, or supporting. I don't think rewarding is the right word. I think supporting the right people. I love the multiplier effect aspect of it. But I think that if we're going to look at a UBI, we need to look at it differently than just this blanket universal basic income. I think there's got to be criteria, there's got to be qualifications, there's got to be, because I think one thing that's taught us about this whole, what I like to refer to as the soft apocalypse that's dropped upon us over the last 14 or 16 months. I love that
term.
That's a great term.
Yeah, like we look at, we don't spend enough time talking about the people working at the convenience stores and the grocery stores and driving the buses and the Uber drivers, and those people put themselves at risk every single day, because when it comes down to a decision whether you're going to make money and feed your family or stay home and not feed your family, I'm sorry, but it's a pretty easy decision to make when you've got these young little eyes looking up at you and say that are depending on you. And so from a universal basic income, if there's a way that we can start providing sick days, and again, I don't want to go down a tangent too much, but I think we look at this rural versus city dichotomy and these dynamics about conservative versus NDP and left wing. Let's never forget who started healthcare. Let's never forget who brought us weekends.
Tommy Douglas.
Tommy Douglas.
Yep.
Exactly. Your rural Saskatchewan, the farmers, the co-ops, let's work together. Let's do this together. And what we find is we have a difference between ranchers and farmers. So again, I think our farmers are the lifeblood of our country. They are the lunch bucket people. They are out there from 4 a.m. till 10 o'clock at night during seeding season. They're out there during harvest. They're feeding our people. So, I worry about that. We need to take care of the people that take care of us. That's really, really important, and we forget about that sometimes.
Absolutely.
That was a really interesting conversation, Jace. I'm glad you asked that question. That's a new one. We haven't talked about that yet over the course of the program. So
how my head works. I can go in all kinds of different tangents. It's just, that's how my brain works.
And that honestly, that's why I love bringing it up, because although they're tangents, what I love about you, Jay, although we've only been talking for 40 minutes, is that you have a great way of tying it back. So thank you. I appreciate that thoughtful answer.
So, Jay, you mentioned the people driving buses. Well, it's not necessarily related to buses, but it's transit. We're talking about the Green Line. So, can you give me some of your thoughts on that? And also, I just learned this today. Thank you, Calgary Transit Twitter. Did you know the 25th is the 40th anniversary of the C-Train system.
I didn't.
Grief, that makes me feel old. You know, I'm gonna tell you flat out where I'm stand with the Green Line. I'm 100% for it. If I could be more than 100% for it, I would. And I'm gonna tell you why. Is that we look at the cost, and we look at the cost, and we go, well, it's half billion dollars. It's going to be 7 billion, 8 billion, 10 billion. We've already sunk 600 million into it. So, but what we're not talking about is the externalities. What is it costing us for road maintenance? What is it costing us from a climate change perspective of not doing it? What is it costing us from congestion? What is it costing our healthcare system with traffic accidents and fatalities? What is it costing our young people? I mean, I did my first job at the Calgary Stampede, and if it wasn't for the C-Train, I would never have had that job. I wouldn't have been able to get around. How are people getting to universities if we're not having these the transit system? I have a very, very dear friend of mine who's a PhD in transportation engineering, and we ran a sample from Ward 13 on a Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. when it's full service and full usage of our transit system. And you couldn't get to all four corners of the city on a 90-minute transfer in the city of Calgary.
No.
We've got, there's another story, I'll cut it off real quick, but there's another story that I read about a school in the Northeast came into Ward 13. They had to play a basketball game, and they had to take the transit. And so they left their school at like 3:30, 4 o'clock. They played their game. They didn't get home until almost 10 o'clock at night because our transit system is so, it's broken, and we need to fix it. And we've got people like oil man Jim Gray standing in front of city council lobbying to, change the Green Line and do it this way. We got to make it less expensive to build. I don't know if he's ever once ridden a train in his life. He probably gets into his big Escalade and goes down to the Ranchman's Club. And why he's weighing in on this is problematic for me. And then his new line that he's proposed that saying it's inexpensive. Yeah, because it's not where people are. You got to put transit where people are going to use it, where it's accessible. And so, and nobody is criticizing the red line or the blue line for their economic impacts of the city. So the economy is, my last point being is that we need to start saying yes on how we're going to accept money from the province and from the federal government. Interest rates are at an all-time low. If this isn't the time to build and put people back to work and create jobs and use money that is basically, it's extremely cheap right now. When are we going to do this? When interest rates go up? When we can't afford to do this, it makes no sense why we're even having this conversation right now. Because the province has no money and they don't want to pay for it. And if they came right out and said that, I'd have way more respect for them. But the fact that our engineers need to look at that. Well, look at the ring road that's going through your ward, Jacob. Look at the engineers, the provincial engineers were all over that, and look what they did there. So.
Oh, and I have no qualms with the red line. You mentioned students taking the transit to their university classes. I know for my poli-sci degree, the red line was a major factor in my scholarly career. So to get a little more granular, since we've talked about some granular sorts of issues with some other guests, what's your thoughts on flood mitigation, underground versus above ground, the accessibility issues of either?
Yeah, I'll go back to the flood mitigation stuff, and I'll go back to, let's go back to Bowness. And a lot of that flood came from the overland flooding because they didn't close the sewers in time. So start looking at that. The city wants to come in. They're not consulting the property owners that are actually directly affected by that. And they need to start talking to the people that are impacted. We need to start having these conversations about what's actually taking place. Yeah, flood mitigation, I think, needs to take place, but at what expense here? And people think that it was all this overland flooding that came in and started flooding all these properties. And I'll go back to Bowness because I know it, and I know what happened. Yes. Is that it was actually coming up from the sewers. But the
Oh yeah, the
Oh,
drainage
yeah.
system turned the
y-
Bowness
yeah,
into a lake. It filled up like a bowl, but it all did come from this.
that's exactly right. So those people need to be the ones at the table making the decisions. But the other people that weren't impacted by it because they don't want their taxes to go up. I get that. I don't want my taxes to go up, but I also want to live in a city that has great services. I've traveled all over the world. I've spent significant time in places like Cambodia, in Guatemala, in Honduras, and I've seen the globe. We are so lucky to have what we have. And it's like the fluoridation comment, Jacob, and I don't know where you stand on that, but my point on something like that is that, I mean, I grew up with fluoride in the water. I think it turned out okay. I mean, I don't
Yeah.
have any side effects. I don't.
Mom grew up on a farm in Saskatchewan. She swears by fluoride in the water. Man.
Of course.
Yeah.
But the problem we have here is that everyone's like, well, it's going to be $20 million. It's going to be $20 million over 30 years.
And
Yeah.
save
$30 million over 20 years.
everybody on dental bills later.
Well,
It's $2 a household per year to save our kids, to save the marginalized populations that can't afford dentistry, to save our seniors that can't afford or have mobility issues that can't go to dentists. You mean, and we're $2 a household, and this is the argument we're having, and we got to go to a plebiscite for it. I don't get it.
It feels as though there's either some, in my opinion, at least from when I've analyzed this, I've looked at this issue myself as well, and what seems to be happening is that there's either special interest, or maybe it's the few that are the minority that's quite loud, but it seems as though there is almost, again, any excuse that we can pull up, big numbers, not really identifying them in a way that they're expressing them in a way that is the reality of things. So like you said, $20 million, that number in and of itself is striking. When you break it down and see it as $2 per household a year, that's very reasonable. And so and the reason why I say this is because if you've spoken, if anyone that is listening, or you gentlemen have spoken to dentists, at least off the record, which I've done a couple of times because I've had some big problems with my teeth over the years, was the idea that, I kind of sat with them and said, let's be real with me. What do I look for? Like, there's 20,000 different types of toothpaste on the market. Are they really all that different? And I'm not kidding you. I won't mention the dentist by name, but this specific dentist looked at me and said, Jason, as long as it has, no word of a lie, as long as it has fluoride in it, it's all the same. Like you're going to find toothpaste without fluoride and toothpaste with fluoride. This particular dentist recommended fluoride and said, don't worry about the brand. If it's got fluoride, I recommend it. And I was like, you sure? He said, absolutely. The rest of it is all branding. It's all this and marketing and this and that. And so, like you said, Jay, we're having this conversation, yet dental professionals who arguably, they're not the ones who are making fluoride or sourcing the fluoride. They don't really have a dog in this fight beyond being passionate about dental care, are saying that this is important. So, I apologize. I get a little fiery about this issue because, again, it seems to be one more, tick on the list of something that is being politicized that doesn't need to be if we were actually to listen to the science and to those who have studied this practice for 100%. Decades. Do you know what I mean?
The first thing
Jason.
my parents said when they took the fluoride out was everybody's dental bills are going to go up. And I'd love to see data on that because
my dentist referred to it as devastating. Those are his exact words. His exact word. It was devastating when it took it out. The data, Jason, man, the science is there. You don't need to look too deep, but you're right. It's this vocal minority that, for some reason, they've read, Dr. Nick Riviera's commentary on this, and all of a sudden now it becomes their passion in life. And it's like, we need to be, an inch wide and a mile deep. We need to start asking ourselves the questions and digging deep, as opposed to being a mile long and an inch deep and just being surface level. Oh, well, I read it. You mean Joe's blog, so it must be true. It's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking.
Simpsons references hockey and history. This is my kind of conversation.
Totally.
But as far as that goes, you mentioned this vocal minority before when they're talking about, well, I'm not going to use this project, so why should I care about it? And it's the same sort of arguments we're hearing when it comes to the event center as well. And it's going to be shocking to you to hear, based on the conversation that we've had, as much as I'm for fiscal responsibility, I'm very pro event center. So,
Yeah.
and it's not just for the Flames, although it would be devastating for the city if the team ever did decide to leave, but there's all kinds of other events that are skipping our city because we have an arena that was state of the art in 1983.
Yeah.
Yep.
100%. And we need to start thinking about, we need to get back to the yes, we can. We need to build that city up. That vision that we had back in the 80s and 90s, we're building our city up. We need to start remembering how to say yes to these projects and say, how do we make this happen? I think it would be devastating to lose the Calgary Flames. I think that, we agreed on an arena deal, and the fact that they came back and said the arena is going to cost an extra $70 million based on before what happened in 4 years ago, cost escalations, I get that. You don't need to look far and wide to see how building materials have been impacted over the last 12 months. It's all over the place. But I think what doesn't sit well with me on this whole thing is that they wanted more land. And that to me was like, well, measure twice, cut once. We could have done that conversation 4 years ago. So, but the price escalation doesn't bother me. I think what really bugs me about this whole thing, you guys, is that it feels like it's Groundhog Day, this election. It's like the Flames are inserting themselves again. We're talking about
absolutely again. It's the same election.
Yeah, it's the same election. Let's make the plans. Let's show some action. We got plans for everything. We got all kinds of plans. We need action. We need to start acting on these kinds of things. Because if we're talking about the Green Line and the event center again in 4 years down the road, Moses smelled the roses.
Same election, knock on wood, different results, because I know both of us would like to be part of the team.
Totally, yeah. I just want the right things for the right reasons, and I want our citizens to have what they need. Once we get what we need, then we can decide what we want. Once we start getting kind of our house in order, we know our tax, the tax share that we share with the province. And we know that the province doesn't have any money, or our province is in big trouble. Oil is up right now, and I think it's going to be another bump for about another year, but it's going down again. We need to start thinking differently. Again, a new way of thinking. That's what we need.
Yes. And touching on the things that you said bugged you about the event center and the negotiations and the snag, this is one of those things where, as much as it was deal being negotiated, there wasn't the right level of communication. So when people saw this extra land ask and an ask for $70 million, it started the whole whoa, wait, what conversation again. And now we're going in a circle.
And now we're going in circles again. Again, now there's that distrust. Again, we come full circle in this conversation, Jacob, about the trust and saying, okay, well, where is this? If we come to these negotiations and understand we need a win-win, the Flames Event Center, their business to make money. That's what they're trying to do. Absolutely understand that. We're the city, and we need to start protecting taxpayers' money, but we also need to start giving quality of life back to its citizens. Just like we're doing with Arts Commons and these kinds of things. I'm all for these things, but let's be reasonable about it. And I don't believe that the Calgary Flames, I don't think they're into this to screwing the city over. I don't think that's their goal. I think they want to be
shock me if they were. A lot of the ownership group are Calgary people. Of
course, man. Born and bred Calgarians, they want the Flames to be here. They don't want to pick up their families and move. They don't want to have to fly, and like Brett Wilson has to go to Nashville to watch his team. I bet you if he can watch his team down the road from his house, he'd probably be a lot happier about it.
And I will also mention, even though I did mention that it would be devastating for the city if the team left, that doesn't mean I think the team is on the verge of leaving, because it would be kind of a silly decision to go from where you do have a devoted, we'll call them a customer base from an economic standpoint, to one where you have to build that again. But with that said, if you're gonna go through another 4 years of going in circles, that's gonna come up in board meetings again.
Business, right? At the end of the day, it's a business, and you mean, yes, I think that the Flames can probably stomach to handle losing a little bit, but they're not going to do it long term. If it's not going to work out, it's like everything else. You mean, they've got shareholders they need to satisfy. They will go to where they can make ends meet. It's economics 101. It really is.
Absolutely.
So we'll get to a new thing I started in the last few episodes, and I'm interested to hear your answer as somebody who is both from Ward 1 originally and lives in Ward 13 now. What's your favorite part of your ward, whether it's a hidden gem or just something that stands out to you?
I have to go really to, I think probably Fish Creek Park is probably one of my favorite places in this ward. I go back to and thank Peter Lougheed. It was his vision. If we didn't have Peter Lougheed, we wouldn't have Fish Creek Park the way it is today. And I think that is the place that I really enjoy going and hanging out and taking my dogs and talking to people. And I just see, there's not a lot of angry people when you get down in Fish Creek Park. They're happy, and you see the kids playing in the creek, and it's a pretty cool place that we have. So I would probably say that's my favorite part of Ward 13. I guarantee you my favorite part of Ward 1 is Bowness Park. I grew up in Bowness Park. I remember Happy Valley, and I love it. So
we have lots of great parks up here, man.
Oh, fantastic.
12 Mile Coulee. I live in Tuscany, so 12 Mile Coulee Park, and
totally.
That's one I discovered because I didn't do a ton of walking before COVID, but when walking became like the only COVID safe activity for a while, we did a lot of walks around the neighborhood, and I discovered, oh, this awesome park is here that'd be beautiful in summer. And but we were talking about recently, just even not a lot of people, or maybe a lot of people, but not everybody, see Calgary as like a big food city. But there's lots of great food if you can find it here as well.
I lived in Calgary. I spent, actually, before I went to university, I probably spent 20 years in the hospitality industry. So I'm very familiar with the food culture within Calgary. And I remembered I moved to Vancouver for 6 years in my 20s, because one of the motivating factors was we didn't have a great food culture in Calgary. We have an amazing food culture in Calgary now. The quality of the restaurants and the diversity of food that we have here it's brilliant. But when I grew up in Calgary, it was Budweiser, it was beef, it was belt buckles, it was big trucks. And it has changed, and it is, we've got some amazing Indian food and Japanese food, and food from everywhere. What do you want? Oh yeah, it's unreal. I love it. It's great.
And I'll get back to a little bit of the meat and potatoes. My dad's originally from the West Island of Montreal, so he swears by King of Subs in Temple as like smoked meat sandwiches in the city.
Now I really need to meet your dad, Jacob. That is what a great call out. My family and I actually looked into, full disclosure, my family is from Montreal. We actually looked into opening up a King of Subs franchise in the Northwest. Because
you should do that. Get somebody to do that. I will advocate for the permits, my friend.
Dude, there's something to be said about like having that specialty. But anyways, that's a great call out. And again, to your point, Jane, I spent a little bit of time, not as much anywhere near, but a little bit of time in the hospitality industry myself. And it's so true. There are so many unbelievable experiences and options in this city that I think as that COVID has been, if there's any silver lining to COVID, which I don't know that there is, but if there is, a couple silver linings, one of them is the idea that I think we've all rediscovered a lot of us have at least rediscovered the local food scene.
Yeah.
And that's, I'm lucky. I'm now kind of, staying downtown at the time as we stand. And I'm very lucky to be able to see those diverse options. And it's incredible. I mean, if you're like me and you're, if you're as lazy as I am, I mean, I'm perusing Uber Eats and DoorDashes and all that great stuff all of the time. And to see all of these new local restaurants popping up is incredible. And I think is a sign of the future health of not only that industry, but of Calgary in general. And I hope that it lends to, and takes away some of the cynicism that I think we're seeing in the city. And hopefully with you gentlemen coming into council, hopefully we can continue that trend and take that cynicism away and show off how beautiful the city is without that.
Love it. Food brings the world together, man. We all
yeah.
and love it.
So we were talking with our last guest that we had about embracing our identity as like a winter city, because in a lot of ways they were saying we might have lost that a little bit with the closures we've had to see at Winsport with the ski jump and the bobsled track. And obviously these are things, amateur sports venues that are in or adjacent to my ward, and I'd love to see back up and running again. But it also speaks to the identity of our city, and I don't think zoo lights is really enough to cut it in the wintertime. And
yeah, although I mean, I do need to give a shout out to the zoo and the operations of the zoo.
It's a great event. Absolutely, it is. Love zoo lights. I'm just saying there needs to be more of that.
Jacob, I'm going to go back to, there's a couple points I want to make on this, and they tie together, and it's, you also look at the Olympic Oval, and that's been shut down for how many months now as well, too. I go back to the '88 Olympics and how amazing that was. And we want to talk about volunteerism. It was the very first Olympics that made money. We made money because of the Calgary spirit, because Calgary got together, and the amount of volunteers that came out. Just the city spirit was amazing. And then we get another opportunity and we probably would have won the bid, but we went to a plebiscite, we voted no, and we turned down a lot of money that would have gone back into our infrastructure, and Canada Olympic Park would have received a ton of that. The University of Calgary would have received a lot of that money as well too. There would have been these amateur facilities that would have been fixed up, and now they're sitting there and they're dying.
Yeah.
And we found a way through that to say no, because
I will say, Yes campaign wasn't super transparent, and they didn't do a great job of selling it. I was still a Yes voter because I love the Olympics. It's not going to be shocking to either of you. I'm an Olympic junkie. I'll be staying up till whatever time in the morning to watch the Tokyo Olympics in summer. But the Yes campaign was flawed, even as a Yes voter back in the day.
You know what it was? Because I don't think that the people on that committee were representative of our city. That was first and foremost. Again, it came down to a taxation, a money issue. They didn't look deep. And what an opportunity to showcase off the city of Calgary as oil prices are going down, to spur investment, saying, look at how beautiful our city is. We had this advertisement that we could have had. It would have been absolutely phenomenal, but we found a way to say no, because you're right, Jacob. The Yes campaign was not organized. It didn't have the representative people on the committee. It wasn't organized well at all. It was the appointment that the city itself didn't get behind. We waffled on it. It was terrible. It was terrible. And we didn't waffle on it back in the 80s when we got it before. Everybody's like, yes, we need this. We're coming out of a huge oil crash. And it was an amazing opportunity. We got to quit finding ways to say no to projects and ways to say yes, and do it responsibly. But I will say
one huge missed opportunity, and it would have been a way to incorporate the blue ring. And I'm not a fan of the blue ring, but make a t-shirt saying it's time to reunite the Blue Ring with the rest of its family. That would have been a great.
There you go. See, there you go. Right.
That would have been a great marketing campaign.
It'd be a great marketing campaign. There you go. Make some use out of that $500,000 Blue Ring. You mean the one thing, guys. I mean, I know we're getting on time here, but I just what we've been doing with Arts Commons. I need to give a shout out. I mean, the board of directors for Arts Commons. They went out and they hired this guy Alex, and I can't remember his last name, but I think he came from the Lincoln Center in New York. And this guy is gold. And his vision for our city and for the arts in this city is absolutely amazing. And he's not going to do it with handouts. I mean, he came from New York, where he said, it wasn't government funding that they got. They had to get, donors and donations and those kinds of things. This guy's a visionary. We're lucky as a city to have him. And I really hope that we as a city invest in that vision of Arts Commons and what they're going to turn the city into, because it's a pretty remarkable thing. If you get a chance to talk to the guy, and I haven't personally, but I've heard him speak a few times, and he's a
I'd
great
be very interested to have him on here potentially to talk about things like that.
You won't be sorry if you can, Jacob. Do it if he's willing to do it.
I agree completely. And again, it is, I'm glad you opened up that conversation there, Jay, because it is right now, it seems to be a pretty hot button topic, at least within the communities that I'm kind of tied into. And the question now becomes, I know that, Mayor Nenshi had mentioned that he would be revisiting the $4 million cap on arts spending. And I think, unfortunately, it is things like the Blue Ring that sully the idea, at least for a lot of Calgarians, of spending more money on art in our city and the artistic investment. However, I think there's a way to incorporate art in a way that is engaging to Calgarians that makes that dollar worth being spent, right?
We gotta do better than the Blue Ring and rocks on sticks, though.
Well, and that's exactly it. I mean, the Blue Ring, I as someone who used to be, we're all artists in our own way, but as someone who was heavily involved in the arts, for many years back in my heyday, as they say, it's unfortunate that they decided to go with a project that was so outside of what I would, in my opinion, is so outside of the needing eyes, or those who are in need of engaging with the city a little bit more. When you look at it locationally, it doesn't really fit in with it doesn't fit in with the airport very well. Like, do you know what I'm trying to say? And same with the rocks on sticks. And I think there's a way to maximize art investment, invest in local artists. It doesn't always have to be this grand $500,000 piece of art that is towering and large and has that what at least was perceived at the time, this panache. I think it can be done well. And so my question to both of you is, do you believe that is a worthy conversation? And Jay, you've kind of mentioned, of course, Arts Common being such an important project, so I kind of know where you stand on it. But what do you guys see in terms of arts in the future of Calgary? And do you see there being maybe a better integration? Are you for more art spending? I know that's kind of a black and white question, and I'm asking 7 questions in one breath. But tell me about arts and municipal investment and where you both kind of stand on that.
Well, as a concept, there needs to be more meaning and context. You've mentioned two projects I firmly dislike because there isn't that context or connection or things around it outside of the people that were involved in the project and a very small circle outside of that. If we can integrate these projects into, say, larger projects like we might see with, say, the downtown strategy, then I think there's some benefit there. But we're notorious for, as you said, these big flashy things with no context for them, and that's not helpful. And with the financial situation that we're in, I think we maybe take this integration slowly, at least when it comes to these kind of project things. arts comments, the project's already happening. So, and it's important for a lot of people. So there's a difference there. But when it comes to the individual projects, I think maybe we do that at a slower and more thoughtful kind of pace.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
you guys have touched on a few different things. I'll just weigh in real quick is that I think that I think we really do need to look and have a really hard conversation about nice to haves over must haves. And we need to address the must haves first. We need to, look at efficiencies over user fees. But Jason, you talked about a couple key words that I really want to make sure that I hit on is you talked about spending and you also talked about investment. And I think the two are very different.
Yes.
Yeah. I love what you said about the investment piece, because I think arts is an investment with tons of payoff for their city when it talks culture and about what we do when we're not at work and how we identify. And you don't need to go, you go to some of these cities with, Toronto's and especially like Montreal, Vancouver, you go to, New York, you go to these great cities, they've got this culture piece where they've invested in their art scene. And because it may not be a 1-to-1 or a 1-to-2 ratio from a payoff perspective, again, we'll talk about the externalities of what that brings to our community. And the other piece that I want to bring in, and I agree with you, Jacob, the Big Blue Ring, I have a really hard time even looking at it, knowing that I think it was a German artist that we paid an exorbitant amount of money. Yeah, we've got this place in Calgary called the Alberta University of the Arts that has amazing artists that are coming out of that,
or what used to be ACAD, right?
Yeah, like the people that are coming out of that are absolutely brilliant. Some of our Indigenous artists and some of our BIPOC artists and stuff that are doing these kinds of things because we're finally talking about conversations that we should be talking about. And why are we not investing in them? And that's the investment piece. I don't look at it as spending. I look at it as investment. But it's like any other investment. We need to be very smart about where we put our dollars and at what time. So it goes back to what you were saying too, Jacob, about it's temporal and spatial.
So you mentioned we are running up against time, and we are. So I'll really quickly get you to what I get people to wrap up their show with, and that's if there's one thing you want people to take away from your campaign, what would it be?
I think the biggest thing that I want people to take away from my campaign is to understand asking the right questions, the hard questions will inevitably get to the right answers. Don't look at political ideologies. Understand Calgary is unique and Calgary needs to be run for Calgarians by Calgarians. I think that's the biggest takeaway from me. And be proud of your city, be proud of who we are, and start looking at ways to get along and how we can do things together as opposed to being divisive. That to me, that hurts my heart when I see that.
The rhetoric needs to change.
The dialogue and the conversation needs to be changed, and let's just be thankful for what we have and how can we do this, because the next 20 years will not look like the last 20 years.
Jason, anything to wrap up from you, man? And then I'll do my outro here.
Absolutely. Hey, gentlemen, this has been an awesome conversation. Jay, I agree with what you're saying. An investment and spending are two different things, and I think there's a way to integrate both. And again, hopefully with both of you on council, we can do that and find that solution 100%. I'm excited to chat more. And yeah, Jake, let's hopefully get Jay back on for another episode. If you'd like to be on there, Jay, we'd love to have you again.
I will totally have Jay on again if we have the time. How about you?
Guys are excellent. I can chat with you guys all day. So I think the one thing that I love is that I think our values really align. So to me, I can have those conversations all day long.
And that's a good place for me to step in, because the important thing is this is a conversation. I started this show to have a conversation with all of you in Ward 1, both about the election and what I want to do and the events happening in our community and other issues that are important to you. So if you want us to talk about something, or if you have questions or concerns, election related, or if you want to talk hockey or food or the Simpsons or history, like we touched on today, you can reach me at Jacob for Ward 1 on social media and at jacobforward1.ca. I'm always open to talk. That's why I got into this. I felt taken for granted as a resident of Ward 1, and that needs to stop. Our council needs to start listening again. As usual, get your vaccinations. Let's get back to the things we all love doing, and that means get your shots, everybody. Most of my family and friends are vaccinated now, and I'm so glad that we're nearly out of this thing. Every vaccination we get is another step closer to victory.
You know, I'd like to say there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and it's not a train. It's getting there. So yeah, I agree. Get your vaccines. Let's get back. I would love to be able to do this in person at some point where you can sit across the table and have a conversation face to face.
Absolutely, or just have beer with you, man.
100%. 100%. You want to go watch a game? I'm your guy.
And
don't
happy 40th birthday to the C Train, as we all learned today. And that is what is going on in your neck of the woods this episode. Bye, everybody.